August 9, 1976, a fisherman in Miami pulls his boat into Dumfoundling Bay. The water is still, the sun is brutal, and something is floating. A 55-gallon oil drum, rusted, bobbing near a sandbar. But the smell tells him otherwise. He calls the Coast Guard. They open the barrel, a body, folded, legs sawed off at the knees, a face that was once called handsome, a man who once sat poolside with Frank Sinatra, a man who played golf every Tuesday with Dean Martin, Johnny Rosselli, the mob's man in Hollywood, the ghost who ran Las Vegas, had finally been silenced. But in Beverly Hills, when Dean Martin heard the news, he made no calls, not to the police, not to his lawyer, not to anyone who was paid to handle his problems. He called room service and ordered a bottle of scotch. Then he sat alone in his living room and said 5 words to no one. I told him to run. What Dean Martin whispered to Johnny Rosselli 6 months earlier, on a Palm Springs golf course, had been a warning. Johnny didn't listen, and now he was floating in a barrel. To understand the friendship between Dean Martin and Johnny Rosselli, you have to understand Las Vegas in 1956. The city wasn't a tourist destination back then. It was a laboratory, a place where the Chicago outfit tested what happened when you mixed gambling, entertainment, and unlimited cash. The Desert Inn was their flagship, and Johnny Rosselli was their ambassador. They called him Handsome Johnny, not because he was vain, though he was, but because in a world of broken noses and scarred knuckles, Johnny Rosselli looked like a movie star. Silk suits, diamond cufflinks, a smile that made women forget he had allegedly killed 13 men. Dean met Johnny at a charity golf tournament in 1958. Fame wasn't what Johnny cared about. He cared about character. And Dean Martin had something rare in Hollywood. He knew when to keep his mouth shut. In Steubenville, Dean had dealt blackjack for men like Johnny. Dean knew the type, men who smiled while they counted bodies. Dean knew that in their world loyalty meant survival. For 20 years, Dean Martin and Johnny Rosselli were inseparable. Golf on Tuesdays, dinner on Fridays. They weren't business partners. They weren't co-conspirators. They were something more dangerous. They were friends, but in January 1976, something changed. That night after a dinner at Chasen's, Johnny looked over his shoulder 3 times walking to his car. Dean noticed. Dean always noticed. The Desert Inn Country Club was Johnny Rosselli's kingdom. He had breakfast there every morning at a table overlooking the 18th green, scrambled eggs, black coffee, the racing form spread across the white tablecloth like a battle map. He had a standing tea time at 2 p.m., and he had a foursome that stayed the same: Johnny, Dean, a casino manager named Victor, and whoever needed a favor that week. Eddie Corso had been a caddy at the Desert Inn since 1954. He carried bags for senators, mobsters, and movie stars. He had seen men lose fortunes on a single putt and laugh about it. He had seen men win championships and weep like children. But this friendship was different. They never talked business on the course, Eddie would say decades later. They just laughed, told jokes, made side bets they didn't bother collecting. It was like watching 2 kids who grew up on the same block. They had, in a way. Steubenville and Boston weren't that different. Both cities bred survivors. Both cities taught you that the rules were written by people who didn't have to follow them. And both cities taught you that friendship, real friendship, was the only currency no one could fake. Dean had watched Johnny operate for 20 years. Dean knew when Johnny was performing and when Johnny was afraid. Dean could read the difference in the way Johnny held his glass, the way Johnny scanned a room before sitting down. This knowledge was worth more than money. When Johnny Rosselli applied for membership at the Friars Club of Beverly Hills in 1963, the board was nervous. Everyone knew who Johnny was. Everyone knew what Johnny did. The initiation fee posed no issue. The issue was what happened if someone asked too many questions at the bar. But 2 names appeared on his application as sponsors: Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin. The board approved him unanimously. No one wanted to explain to Frank why his friend couldn't join the club. By 1975, the world Johnny Rosselli had built was crumbling. The Senate Church Committee wanted him to testify about the CIA, about Castro, about poison pills, about assassination plots that read like bad spy novels. The Chicago bosses were nervous. Sam Giancana had already been shot 7 times in the face, in his own kitchen, the night before he was supposed to testify. It wasn't a coincidence. Johnny knew he was next. He started sleeping in different hotels every night. He stopped playing golf at his regular courses. He hired a driver, a young Cuban kid who didn't ask questions, and he started varying his routes. But he never ran. Running wasn't Johnny's style. Running was what other people did when they got scared. Johnny Rosselli didn't get scared. Johnny Rosselli got careful. That night in December 1975, Dean couldn't sleep. He picked up the phone and called Johnny. "Come to Palm Springs," he said, "just you and me, like the old days." Johnny agreed without asking why. No casino managers, no favor seekers, just Dino and handsome Johnny, the way it used to be. What happened on the 14th hole would stay between them forever, until now. The 14th hole at Tomorris Country Club is a par 5 point, 560 yards. Dogleg left, a lake guarding the green like a moat around a castle. The sun was starting its descent, painting the San Jacinto Mountains in shades of orange and purple. The air smelled like cut grass and cigarette smoke. Dean and Johnny were alone. Dean had sent the caddies back to the clubhouse after the 12th hole, told them he wanted to walk the last 6 by himself, clear his head. Eddie Corso had looked at him funny but didn't argue. You didn't argue with Dean Martin, not when he used that voice. Johnny lined up his tee shot. His hands were steady. They were always steady. 50 years of holding guns and golf clubs had given him the same grip for both. "I'm going to Miami," Johnny said, not looking up from the ball. "After the holidays. My sister's there. I'll lay low for a while, let things cool down." Dean didn't respond. He just watched. The way he used to watch card players in Stonemanville. The way he learned to read tells before he learned to read music. Dean watched Johnny swing. The ball sailed down the fairway, drawing slightly left, landing in perfect position for the approach shot. Johnny watched it bounce twice and settle into the grass, then turned to Dean with that easy, charming smile. "You worried about me, Dino?" "Don't go, Johnny." The smile flickered. "Just for a moment, like a candle in a draft." "What?" "Don't go to Miami." Dean's voice was different now. Lower. The voice he used when he dropped the drunk act, when he stopped playing the charming fool who couldn't remember his own lyrics. This was the real voice, the Stonemanville voice, the voice that had talked its way out of back rooms and into recording studios. "I heard things, Johnny. People are talking." Johnny laughed, but Dean heard something wrong in that laugh. It was shorter, tighter, the laugh of a man expecting bad news. "People are always talking. Not like this." Dean stepped closer, close enough to see the gray in Johnny's temples, close enough to see the fear behind the charm. "Run, Johnny," Dean whispered. "Europe, South America, anywhere. Just don't go to Miami." The silence stretched between them like the fairway ahead. Two men who had known each other for 20 years. Two men who had never once talked about what Johnny actually did for a living. Two men who had built their friendship on the understanding that some questions stayed unspoken. Dean saw Johnny smile. That handsome doomed smile that had charmed starlets and senators and stone-cold killers. "I've been running my whole life, Dino. I'm tired." Dean watched him pick up his bag and start walking toward his ball. Dean didn't move. He couldn't move. His feet felt like they were sunk in the perfectly manicured grass. "Besides," Johnny called back over his shoulder, "nobody kills me. I'm too pretty." Dean watched him walk away. The sun was lower now. Johnny's shadow stretched behind him like a dark road leading nowhere good. Dean had learned to read men in Steubenville. Johnny was scared, and scared men in their world didn't retire to Miami. They didn't visit their sisters. They disappeared. 6 months later, Johnny Rosselli drove to a marina in Miami. He got on a boat with two men he trusted. One was an old friend from Chicago. The other was a stranger, a quiet man with dead eyes who Johnny didn't recognize. The boat headed out into Dumfoundling Bay. Johnny was dead within the hour, strangled, sawed, stuffed into a 55-gallon drum, thrown overboard like garbage. Dean Martin never played the 14th hole at Tamarisk again. August 10, 1976. The phone rang in Dean Martin's Beverly Hills home at 7:14 a.m. He was still asleep. He was always still asleep at 7:14 a.m. His hand found the receiver without his eyes opening. "Johnny's dead." 3 syllables. No explanation needed. The voice on the other end hung up before Dean could respond. He called no one. Not his wife, not his children, not the people paid to solve his problems. Dean walked downstairs to the bar, poured 4 fingers of scotch into a crystal glass, and sat in his favorite chair, the one facing the window, the one where Dean could see the pool but no one by the pool could see him. Rosa Mendez had worked for Dean Martin for 11 years. She had seen Dean drunk more times than she could count. She had seen Dean heartbroken after his son died. She had seen Dean stare at the telephone for hours, waiting for Jerry Lewis to call a call that wouldn't come. But this was something new. He ate nothing, Rosa would say decades later. Said nothing. Just sat there, holding that glass, staring at nothing. Around midnight, I heard him say something. Just one sentence. I couldn't understand it at first. But then he said it again, louder, like he was talking to someone who wasn't there. I told him to run. The days after Johnny's death blurred together. Dean canceled 3 shows. His manager told the press it was exhaustion. But it wasn't exhaustion. Dean couldn't perform. Every time Dean walked toward a stage, he saw Johnny sitting in the front row. The FBI came to Dean's house 3 days later. 2 agents, gray suits, forgettable faces. They asked about Johnny's business. Dean said he didn't know anything about business. They asked about Johnny's enemies. Dean said Johnny didn't have enemies, just friends who forgot. They asked about the golf games. Dean smiled that famous smile. We talked about women and horses. Nothing else. The agents knew Dean was lying. Dean knew they knew. But Dean Martin had learned to lie in Steubenville, in back rooms where the wrong answer got you more than a sternly worded letter. Lying to 2 FBI agents in gray suits was nothing. The investigation went nowhere. No arrests, no indictments, no trials. Johnny Rosselli's murder was officially classified as unsolved, a designation that meant everyone knew who did it, but no one could prove it, and no one really wanted to try. Dean Martin went back to work. Dean filmed a TV special. Dean played Vegas. Dean smiled for the cameras and told jokes about being drunk and pretended that nothing had changed. Life moved on. The world forgot Johnny Rosselli. The newspapers stopped calling. The FBI closed their files. Dean Martin was Dean Martin again, the drunk, the charmer, the king of cool. The story was over, but something had changed. The ritual started 3 weeks after Johnny's funeral. Every Tuesday for the next 19 years, Dean Martin drove to the Desert Inn Country Club. Dean walked past the slot machines, past the blackjack tables, past all the noise and desperation. Dean sat at table 7, the table overlooking the 18th green, and ordered Johnny's breakfast: scrambled eggs, black coffee. The racing form spread across the white tablecloth, and Dean left an empty chair across from him. The staff knew not to seat anyone there. The newer employees would ask about it. Who was he waiting for? And the older ones would just shake their heads. Don't ask, they would say. The chair is taken. It would always be taken. Johnny Rosselli's killers were never caught. The FBI suspected Frank the German Schweiz, a Chicago hitman with dead eyes and steady hands. They suspected Tony Accardo ordered the hit, punishing Johnny for talking too much to the Senate, for knowing too many secrets, for living too long. They suspected a dozen different motives and a dozen different triggermen. It didn't matter. In their world, reasons were luxuries. Results were all that counted. We all have friends we can't explain. Friends whose secrets we carry like stones in our pockets. We all have someone we'd lie for, someone we'd protect even when the truth would set us free. We all carry ghosts. We all make choices about loyalty. Dean Martin made his choice in Steubenville, at 17, dealing cards to men who could have killed him for counting wrong, and he never wavered. Dean didn't talk about Johnny to reporters. Dean didn't write about him in interviews. Some friendships exist only in silence. On Christmas morning, 1995, Dean Martin died in his sleep. Dean was 78 years old. His lungs had failed. His heart had given up. But before Dean died, he made one request. It wasn't in his official will. No lawyer ever filed it. Dean just told Rosa one night when the scotch had made him honest. When I'm gone, scatter some of my ashes at the Desert Inn. Table 7. Johnny's waiting. He whispered it like a confession, like a prayer. The Desert Inn was demolished in 2004. They built a new casino on the site. Bigger, shinier, designed for tourists who didn't know what Las Vegas used to be. No one remembers Table 7. No one remembers the empty chair. But if you listen closely on a Tuesday afternoon past the slot machines and the tourist chatter, and the carefully manufactured excitement, you might hear something. 2 men laughing. Old jokes that stopped being funny 40 years ago. And a voice soft as a whisper carrying across the years. I told him to run. He did. Just not far enough. Dean Martin kept that chair empty for 19 years. Every Tuesday, 988 breakfasts, scrambled eggs and black coffee for a man who would never walk through that door again. He never explained it to anyone. He never wrote about it. He never mentioned Johnny's name in interviews. Some grief doesn't need an audience. Some loyalty doesn't need applause. But here's the question that haunts me. If you knew your friend was walking into a trap, if you could see the ending before it happened, would you warn him? Dean did. He whispered 5 words on a golf course in Palm Springs. Run, Johnny. Just run. Johnny smiled. Johnny laughed. Johnny said he was too pretty to kill. 6 months later, he was floating in a barrel. Did Dean blame himself? We'll never know. He never said. But every Tuesday for almost 2 decades, he sat at that table and ordered breakfast for 2. He talked to an empty chair. He carried that weight until the day he died. We all have someone like that. Someone whose calls we answer at 3 a.m. Someone whose secrets we keep even when they burn. Someone we'd lie for to the FBI, to our families, to ourselves. The question isn't whether you have that friend. The question is, what would you do when the warning doesn't work? Would you blame yourself forever? Would you keep an empty chair? Would you whisper to ghosts in a restaurant until the day they tore the building down? Dean Martin took his answer to the grave. What's yours? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you believe that loyalty, real loyalty, the dangerous kind, is something worth remembering, subscribe, hit the bell, because this channel isn't about celebrities. It's about the people behind the masks, the stories the spotlight never showed, the friendships that shaped legends and broke them. New untold stories every week. Welcome to Dean Martin Untold Stories. Step behind the curtain.